So I'm Neil Maiden. I'm Professor of Digital Creativity at City University of London, and I've been a member and partner in the EU Quest project for the last few years. And what I'm going to do today is report on the results of work from Quest, which we've integrated with another project that has led to a commercial product that we launched as part of a startup. The focus is very much on supporting science journalism. The structure of what I'm going to cover in the next 45 minutes is essentially threefold. I'm going to, first of all, use a few slides just to give you some context to report some of the co-design work we did with science journalists over the last year to 18 months so that you understand the rationale for the demonstration that I'm going to run afterwards. And then I'll sort of come back with a slide offering you opportunities to engage with us further in different ways. Since I'm going to be doing lots of demonstrating and slide projecting in Zoom, it's very difficult for me to see chat questions. So what I'm going to do is pause and take questions verbally from you directly or via Sarah once I've done the first 10 minutes of slides. I'll then do the demonstration, if you can note your questions, and then I'll pause at the end of the demonstration, more questions, and then we can have some follow-up. And I shall try and do all that in the next 42 minutes. So that is the plan. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, start off with PowerPoint. Hopefully you can see a big yellow screen. Can someone just confirm you can see the screen?
I confirm that we can.
Thank you very much. So yes, very much what I said I'd be doing here is talking about the work, the research and development work as part of Quest that has led to essentially science journalism support extensions to the Jet AI product. I'm going to play down the AI term, partly having listened to the previous panel discussions, but generally also because I tend not to over rely on the AI term. It was put there by our marketing team. So let me launch on. Bit of context, really, I guess everyone understands that the first part of this, you know, we're really needing to be reporting science communication better. So this project work came along at a very nice time with topics like climate crisis, vaccine denial, and now COVID, really requiring more effective science communication. As we heard the previous panel, our work identified that this was happening against the backdrop of actually decreasing numbers of science journalists. And in some sense, some of the slack being taken up by journalists who are not trained as science journalists, but have to include an element of science in their stories. And I think COVID is a very good example of that. It started off as a science story, but clearly it's got sciences impacting on ethics, on economy, on security, etc. So we recognize there's probably fewer trained science journalists around, and those journalists also are having to work under shorter and shorter deadlines. So this is really the broad context for us to design a new form of bespoke digital support. And I put the word support there twice, just to emphasize that this is not about automation of the journalist's work. This is to provide them with intelligent support to quicken the work that they can undertake so as to better meet the short deadlines, and to augment the work that they undertake so that they can deliver work which is more effective and of better quality for the purpose of science journalism. So in terms of the way that we developed this, we undertook a classic participatory design approach. So we weren't mandating it had to have an AI element in the technology solution. We've reported this elsewhere in the Quest project. Alessandra and others can direct you to the work. But essentially, we interviewed 18 science communication experts, science journalists, all very experienced from 6 European countries. And we explored how they both saw the challenges and the practices that work for them at the moment. And there were 4. I've realized I've actually got to move my screen around here so I can actually see the quotes. There we go. So the first, sorry, this is kind of awkward when I've got your images on my screen as well. So the first problem that was identified is one that we've already heard about, which was the lack of time and resources. There was not sufficient time, budget, and expertise to deliver the science communication effectively, even for experienced journalists. So some quotes here. As an individual journalist within that unit producing science content, the challenges are funding because everybody's being squeezed. Another one, well, the main challenge I face now is the fact that there are only 5 reporters and 2 political writers, so we're massively understaffed. There's a definite lack of budget earmarked for science journalism in most of the mainstream media. I think we again tallies with what we heard earlier. And an interesting one here, just as an example of how you get novel angles. Yeah, I get Eureka Alert, but everyone else gets it. So that's actually of limited use for me because I'm just using the same sources as everybody else. Also, we identified, and this kind of surprised us a little bit, that the journalists are not just going to academic papers, they're going to actually quite a wide range of digital resources when they're researching and developing stories. And I think we were surprised by this. So just to include some quotes, Twitter, obviously, just for staying up to date, scientists use Twitter a lot, which I think is a fair observation. And this one was quite interesting, even though this person was an experienced science journalist. I get my everyday news. I try to get as broad a range as possible, but mainly the New York Times, the Guardian, and the BBC website. So science journalists are not just looking at the science per se, they're trying to understand it in a wider context. And that really influenced the way in which we then developed the digital support. The third theme was around audiences for science journalism and the recognition that effective communication really needs to tighten down on the definitions of audiences. Yes, we've really tried. We've really changed the way we make programs. This was a radio producer to try to appeal to different groups of people, and obviously trying to attract a younger audience. So producing science content is very targeted at particular audiences. You know, much more focused now on just meeting readers where they are rather than them coming to you. So focus on social media, you know, just not necessarily expecting them to come to our site, but just giving them the news, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter. So again, really trying to tailor the content about science to your audience, which has interesting questions again for some of the themes at the end of our last panel session. And then finally, there was also a recognition to do more work around explaining science. So I see my job as explaining a bit more than, say, a political editor would. But it's not storytelling. You have also to explain things, to put things in context and so on, which kind of comes back to that wider piece around looking at broader non-science news when trying to understand the sources and the background for stories. So these are 4 themes that we picked out. There were others. If you want to know more about these were reported in a paper in Nordic by us last week, and we can share that with you if you want to reach out. So all of this then led to the development of digital support. And we developed a digital prototype, which was within the context of Quest, which we called InQuest, which was a humorous title that kind of stuck in the project. I don't think it's marketable. And one of the purposes of the tool was to increase some of the automation of some of the work that journalists do. Now, this is not to automate their decision making and so on, but technologies are good at particular subtasks within journalist work role. So we identified opportunities to increase the task automation. And in order to do that, we implemented particular types of technology that use AI elements, so natural language processing and sense making from text written in multiple languages. We recognized there was a role for creative supporting journalist creativity in an everyday creativity sense. So we leverage computational creativity algorithms. And related to that, we implement also creative search algorithms. So we're not using any machine learning and what people often consider to be sort of what is AI today, which tends to, I think as Luke said, as people have a very narrow view of AI and unaware of what's happened over the decades, which is still very relevant to the way we work. And these technologies were used to try and bring into a one-stop shop many of the diverse digital sources that might be available to journalists. So papers, scientific papers, newspaper articles, Eureka alerts, etc., all into one place for the journalists to manipulate this content in one go. Interestingly, also, we were quite surprised there seemed to be a relatively small number and limited research around science audience personas. So I come from a digital design background where having a persona, an idealized fictional description of the target user, is kind of important. So in the work, we leveraged existing research in science journalism that looked at clusters of audience characteristics to identify particular characteristics of disengaged science audiences. These are the types of people in society or representatives of people in society who maybe aren't engaging with science as it is at the moment in the way that they communicate it. So we developed some personas which are interactive, and you will see these in the demonstration. And we also leveraged rhetorical structure theory to provide some sort of creative support for providing what we call explanation sparks that I won't demonstrate in the version today. But they also are there to sort of encourage the journalists to think about how they might leverage and explain the content more effectively to their audiences. So that's sort of an overview of what I'm going to show you and some of the background, a kind of rushed background of what we did over the last I suppose 6 to 8 months of design work. So let me just end the show and stop sharing, because I always find that an easier way. Are there any questions at this point before I launch into the demonstration of the outcome of this work? More maybe questions around the content of what we've developed and the rationale for the design.
Just a reminder to the audience that if anyone wants to ask a question, please go ahead and activate your camera and microphone.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a good point. I'll count down to avoid an embarrassing silence. 5. Virginia has asked something in chat. It's not been just for science journalists. I think it's targeted at journalists who have to incorporate an element of science in the work. And in fact, you could argue that experienced and very capable science journalists probably have less to gain from this kind of digital support than those that have less experience. So I think it's open to all, but we haven't built it explicitly just for science journalists. And we had more general journalists, such as here in Italy, regional television journalists who had sort of typically 90 seconds to report a news item in a regional news channel as users feeding into the design process. So hopefully that answers your question, Virginia. It does. Thank you very much. Okay, I will move on. 3, 2, 1, no more questions. Right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and we get to the slightly more hair-raising stage of running a live demo of quite a complex tool, whilst I'm also broadcasting from a home Wi-Fi on Zoom. So here we go. I'm hoping that you can see a screen with what looks like lots of colored boxes in front of you. Is that true? Thank you, Dunya. So yes, what I'm showing here now is a version of the resulting tool. This is essentially now available as an early version of a commercial product, and we've integrated Quest features in it. And my aim is to focus here more on Quest features. So I've chosen an example that came up yesterday when I was doing a demonstration with French journalists who are online in Paris around pesticides and the food chain, which is an interesting angle around science and how that might be of interest to a wider public. Essentially, at this point, in this moment in the demonstration, I've already asked the tool to give me some interesting content, and I've asked it to do it over the last year. Go and find me interesting content over the last year, order it by relevant sources. So I'm not specifically focused on science here immediately, but as you can see, immediately our tool is giving users over where they want to hone down. So if you want some new angles on, say, the US election, you probably want to focus on what's there over the last 48 hours. And we're also able to control by the order by which the content is presented, including by positive and negative sentiment. So our tool is also undertaking what is called sentiment analysis, which is analyzing stories and producing essentially a score for how positive or negative that story seems to be. And that feature emerged from interaction and co-design work with journalists. So basically what you can see here is the tool has quite a lot of content that it's offering you. And what it's presenting at the moment are some topics that might be relevant to you based on all news sources. So unsurprisingly, topics that a lot of stories are writing around are pesticides, climate change, Kenya, China, and so on. You've got topics that are less common that could give you angles, such as Angela Merkel, induced coma, some kind of inhibitor that I'm not going to try and pronounce. Interestingly, down here in this sort of less common themes, the Republican Party of the United States and the Clean Water Act. So it's nudging you towards angles that I can explore. And over here, it's also giving me names of journalists and scientists that I might be interested in talking to or interviewing. Now, all of this is based on current news. And what I want to do now is press the button and ask it to investigate whether it's actually working to do the same content with science. Now, at this moment, the tool is actually doing quite a lot of hard work under the bonnet. It's undertaking different kinds of analyses, sense making, it's undertaking different kinds of sentiment analysis and processing tens of millions of possible scientific publications and supporting news stories from the science sections of newspapers. And based on the science content, which is now more quest focused rather than the original JECT product, you notice that some of the content here on the left-hand side in what we call our landing card has changed. So it's narrowed its focus. It's suggesting 54 stories, of which 27 are positive. And here you can see that we've got some topics that people are writing about in most of these stories. So again, you're seeing pesticide, but now insecticide, nitrogen, biodiversity is coming up. In some of the stories, maybe about sort of a half to a third, we've got herbicide, food security, algae, India, fertilizer. Each of these topics could be angles that you could explore for the stories. And then down here in the in what we call the sort of the wild cards, where there's only a few, and the tool is sometimes going to suggest some rather odd called false positives. You've got topics like the Arctic, Vince Overson, who's a former English footballer. I think that's where it's a false positive. Food and Agriculture Organization and Russia. So you can see how it's coming up with advice. I'll show you what the pop-ups mean in a minute. Likewise over here, the tool is suggesting people that you might want to talk to who are related to this story. And at the moment we structure it by two parts. The first is journalists who have written and others who have written on this story that we've identified, and others are scientists who are writing on the topics. So you can also engage with them. And I thought this was quite interesting because this feature here has become very important in that all of the evaluations we're undertaking with newsrooms and journalists suggest that this is probably the single most important feature. So we're in the process of extending it. And in part, I think there's been a very, maybe it's Black Lives Matter, maybe it's a sort of wider understanding of science communication. We've also implemented a number of algorithms over the last weeks that support diversity. So the tool is not just suggesting who seem to be the best names, it's trying to generate a balanced selection based on the ethnicity and gender of the people. So it's not just presenting white middle-class males such as myself as an expert to talk on a subject, it's presenting different names of people from different backgrounds in different parts of the world. And that's really struck a chord with a lot of journalists as they try to diversify and broaden their links. So I'll show you these features when I drill down in a little while. But as you can then see, there are articles from The Lancet, Science Alert, Scientific American, Informationswissenschaft, and so on, including something in the email here, which does actually have quite a strong sort of health sciences presence in the UK in spite of its politics. So if I then sort of try and demonstrate some of these features, so you may have noticed as I've moved the mouse around over some of the topics that the tool is suggesting, it's nudging me towards angles. So if I hover over, I don't know, nitrogen, it says, think about the nature of nitrogen, what is essential about nitrogen, and how the uses of nitrogen might influence your story. I go, well, that's kind of interesting. How does that help me with food chain and pesticides? So what I can do is, click on crikey, showing bad usability here with a sweaty hand. So if I'm interested in, say, okay, how does the uses of nitrogen, how might that interest my story around pesticides and food chains? I can click on it. The tool will open up a separate Google search, and it's running something interesting here around food chain. So it might say, I can explore this story here. For example, it's taking me to the excessive use of fertilizer and pesticides destroying the food chain. So there's something around nitrogen there that could be interesting for me to follow up. And that's published in a source that you might not immediately discover. Oops, I might just close the wrong window, never mind. If I come back, I can then do the same kind of analysis, say, with fertilizer. So if I'm interested in the consequences of fertilizer, I can undertake a Google search, and it will interestingly take me to excessive uses of fertilizer. I can drill down on something on the BBC here. I should say that when I'm running a demonstration like this with a creativity tool, I'm not always sure of what I'm going to get. So this is sort of, bear with me. So you can see how the tool can nudge me towards creative angles on stories, but also take me very quickly with a couple of clicks to the sources. Likewise, if I get some topics that I'm not particularly familiar with here, so if I'm wanting to know more around content around entomology, for example, I can click on the entity, and the tool will sort of take me to concepts of entomology, and then link me to stories that are entomology and locust plague story published in Science Alert. So again, I can kind of drill down and get interesting themes on stories. So that is essentially how the landing card works. So you could just work with the landing card if you were looking for content. Likewise with the people, if I want to know more about some of these scientists, such as Carly Casella, I have no idea who she is, but she wrote a story on CT scans show that the brains of baby bumblebees could get invariably damaged by pesticides. I go, well, that could be interesting. I should look at that. I can click it through, and it will take me all to, I can learn about Carly on Science Alert. Likewise, if I then want to go and explore scientists, so we're interested, say, in, we look at a name that maybe we could consider to be more diverse, it's not a European name, Mohammed Aslam, we can go and explore him, and we can immediately identify who he is in Pakistan. He's a Pakistan-based academic working in this topic, and may have something interesting to say if we chose to interview him on the story. So again, you've got the same ability to follow through with a couple of clicks to diverse names of people to engage with. So there are other cards here that I will dwell less on. There's a card that encourages combinations of angles, a kind of combinational creativity support here. Some other kind of more text-based nudges, for example, think about how to write this story without the food chain being part of it. Think about people taking the view of the opposites of people who have views on pesticides, etc. And then essentially I've got the same kind of functionality for specific stories. So if I'm interested on this one here, this seems relevant, on balance, some neonicotinoid pesticides could whatever, I can immediately click through to the story, and that will take me to the source if I come back. And likewise, I've got the same kind of functionality related to the content from that story about bumblebees, pollination, neonicotinoids, and pollen, and so on. So I can again drill through very quickly to explore whether that's an interesting angle or topic that I might want to include in my story. Done kind of run through of a lot of, sort of the core functionality there of the basic search. I haven't really talked very much about these icons at the top here. And these icons are designed to give the user, the journalist, more control over what comes up. And we design these creative search strategies based on interviews with experienced journalists. So I've just been running it based on everything at the moment, but I can ask it to go and drill down on papers and stories that have more backing and evidence in them, that are maybe more quantitative, stories that will give me more about other people that are involved, stories that give me what we call the background, what's the long read behind pesticides and food chain, papers that and articles that explore more what are the future ramifications for pesticides and food chain, etc. I've got an eye on the clock here, so I won't run those now, but I can do later on if needs be. So that's kind of dealing with what I would call the first feature that we built into the original product based on Quest, which is really trying to open up all of these science angles for journalists writing about science. Now down here at the bottom, there's a Quest feature that then takes us to a set of other content types, or sets of content types that are relevant to the work that science journalists might want to undertake. Through, it immediately takes me to a set of science personas. So these are the science audience personas that we developed on the back of published research in science journalism publications. So each persona is developed to represent a prototypical member of a particular cluster of a group of people who has a different type of association or engagement with science. So we have here Michelle and Marion and Paul and Vipin, who are all disengaged with science. We have Mark, who's a science-phile, and then we have Natalie, who is critically interested, Francesca, the teenager, and Joanna, who is passive. Now, all of these types are identified in previous research. There is a short summary here. So if we focus on Marion, Marion is a 53-year-old woman with 2 adult children who does not work. She has multiple health problems that are exacerbated by her lifestyle, creating a sense of powerlessness. She has little interest in science and does not see its relevance. If I wanted to get the full persona, it's there. Something's gone wrong with the positioning of the card, but we can fix that. So you can use that persona to think, if I'm writing a story around pesticides and food chain, what would I write and where would I position that story if I was targeting people who are represented by this caricature of Marion? So I can use that as is. We've also done some work to develop various themes around the personas. So, you know, the tool might nudge me to think about the broadcasting, where might I broadcast these stories? Apparently she tends to, you know, people in this group will use Facebook a lot, think a lot about the reading levels, you know, link it to popular stories. What are the things that Marion might like? The coverage in the programs that she might watch. What kind of television programs might she watch? So we've got these kind of creative pop-ups nudging you there, and sort of maybe, since she has concerns about her health and this is a health story, look to develop stories with health angles of interest to Marion and publish them under health. Now I can also click on that button and it will implement a function similar to what we had before. It will then sort of nudge me through Google search to think about common trending health topics that we could link into the story. So maybe there's an issue around mental health and pesticides and concerns over diet related to COVID, because we're maybe not eating as well as we were. So that's with the other personas. Our aim at the moment is to develop these personas further. We're going to evolve them, we're going to extend them. We are aware that the AI generated pictures of the personas are largely white, and that needs to be changed as well, but we didn't want to use real people. So that is the personas part. Another feature that we've added is resulted from co-designing the tool and running the prototype with broadcast journalists. And I mentioned in the introduction, we were talking to broadcast journalists who work for Italian regional television stations. And their challenge to us was, okay, this is all very well, but I have 90 seconds to communicate a science-based story to a broad regional audience in the 6 o'clock news. How do I do that? And they made a very strong claim about the importance of metaphors. So we then undertook a kind of harvesting exercise and collected a set of about 70 science communication metaphors that appear to be useful in communicating about the 3 topics that Quest is interested in. So that's vaccine and vaccine denial, climate change, and the perceived role of AI in society. So what you can see here is a set of metaphors, each of which we've described in a common form based on the original sources. You can scroll through these so you can see there's kind of more AI-oriented ones here, such as machine-made recipes and coding recipes, partly about just trying to demonstrate that a lot of AI is code, it's software like other software. And up here you've got interesting issues around vaccination for evasion for the vaccine challenge, and the more common metaphors you've got at the top here, like the carbon bathtub for climate change. And again, these are interactive, so if I focus on the carbon sink, we've added different kinds of creative support to get you to think as a journalist about sort of how you might sort of communicate these metaphors more suitably. So if I'm interested, you know, the carbon sink has this idea of filling the sink. Can the metaphor explain the filling in sink more effectively? If yes, try to use it. And one of the observations we did make is that a lot of the metaphors are used make assumptions about I'm just trying to find one here around greenhouse effect. It makes an assumption that the audience has and understands greenhouses. If you're living in an impoverished part of Africa, a greenhouse might not seem to be a very effective metaphor for communication because you're not familiar with it. So these prompts are kind of there to encourage you to think about the strengths and weaknesses of the metaphor for your audience, which again could be based, as I said, on these personas. There's other features here around explanation strategies that I haven't got time to show you because I want to leave some time for questions and discussion. But we've also got a notion of quality indicators. So within the Quest project more generally, there was a fairly robust and large effort in order to develop a set of indicators of good science journalism, that it should be scientific, factual, balanced, transparent, clear, coherent and contextual, spellbinding, interacting with the audience, purposeful and targeted, impactful, relatable and responsible. So there are more detailed descriptions of these that you can click through to via these cards or on the Quest project website. We've tried to summarize them here. At the moment, they're a bit standalone, and where we're thinking about working more with science journalists to integrate them more into the functionality to understand how that can be useful. So I think I've kind of coming to the end of the demonstration. Now, what I am going to do finally here is just open a new tab because I accidentally deleted something earlier, and open up Google Docs just to show you the other forms that the tool can operate in. So if I open up untitled document. So I showed you the web application version of the tool, which is kind of effective for me running the tool in demonstration mode to show a lot of content, but clearly that is not an effective way of often supporting journalists. So if I just type in Maiden quick and then run it. What we have actually designed the tool is to operate as a series of plugins on the right-hand side of various text editors that journalists tend to work in. So I'm showing it here running in Google Docs. It's also designed to run in WordPress, Adobe InCopy. It's also been developed for a number of content management systems that we're working with. You can see how it works here, that we're working with various, they're used in newsrooms. So it's also available, it appears within existing tools, at least in simple form. And you can see you can operate it here more by scrolling. So you've got more or less the same content as you would have, as I showed in the web app, but it's there on the right-hand side, and you can simply open it and close it when you need it. And even with a relatively, a lot of content going down my internet pipe at the moment, you can see it's reasonably quick. So I can just close that again when I'm finished. So the idea is the tool is providing you with support more or less at the click of a button by using the add-on feature in most of these text editors. So that was fast. I do apologize if my English appeared a bit quick, but I was trying to get through a lot of content for you quickly and leave a little bit of time for any comments or questions or doubts that you might have. And if Alessandra wants to chip in, if she thinks I haven't mentioned anything questy that I was supposed to, I'm happy to hear it. There are some questions I see. So Angelique, asks, can this tool distinguish between trustworthy and unreliable sources? The answer is yes, because we have imposed an editorial policy on it. So you won't find Breitbart or the Daily Star or content like that. So we determine where the tool looks. So we have, for the general news tool, we have a small editorial team that makes judgments about that. And for the science content, we engaged with science journalists and experts who were part of the Quest project to direct us to trustworthy sources, because we weren't able to judge. So the answer is yes. The list is expandable if we agree to add a new topic. So if we particularly want to focus on a new sub-branch of science, we can add content for that. Any more questions? Thank you, Luke. That's very generous.
May I ask an additional question?
Of course you can, May.
Yeah, so it is really very, very robust service that you are providing. And you mentioned that you are targeting that to journalists. What about communication professionals? Because they are also interested in monitoring what and who is writing about specific topics in which they are working. So what is your plan now for rolling out this service beyond the project as well?
Yeah, so very much you've led quite nicely into what will be my last slide. So thank you, Virginia. We have in August launched a startup business that will maintain and support the tool that you've seen beyond the end of Quest and beyond the end of other Eject funding. The tool is called Eject AI, and you can have a link to it afterwards on my slide, and I can arrange for anybody who wants access. Now, as part of launching a business this year, it's not the best time to be launching a startup business. Plus, of course, news and media is under even more economic pressure than before. So part of our business strategy is to roll out into PR, marketing and communications in 2021. And to do that, we're adding additional features, which is around commissioning and contracting journalists that you might find. So to try and increase the speed and support for other parts of processes. We've looked at the process of commissioning. If you're an editor, how do you find a journalist to write on a topic? It's quite a messy process. If we can use our tools to support and augment that process, then we will do that. So our aim is to move into that field in 2021, but we're having to take a staged approach because we haven't completed the market analysis for that sector yet.
Thank you.
Okay, Joanna, okay, yes, Luke mentioned some challenges. I'm not going to click on that. Sorry now, Luke, it's going to take too long for me to follow up. Joanna says, yes, multilingual, that's a very good point. Yes, the tool works in a range of languages. At the moment, we're focused on support for French, German and English. So yesterday I did a demonstration in French for an hour. It does support other languages, a little bit of Italian, Dutch, Norwegian, I think there's one other I've forgotten, Greek. But we're not supporting those at the moment because there's additional effort in doing that. And ultimately, we want to make the tool multilingual, so I can work in English, but the tool might find sources written in German and French. At the moment, we kind of stovepiped. If you're in English, you stay in English content. If you're in French, you stay in French content. There's an interesting sort of challenge about there's all sorts of design challenges that emerge if we start to mix content in different languages. But you can at the moment work in German and French. And I don't know, Joanna, I'm not going to make a presumption about your working language, but those are the languages we're supporting. Okay, so Portuguese and Spanish. Oh, we never had a Portuguese partner in the original consortium, so that's why we didn't go down the Spanish route. We are well aware that we're missing whole of Spain and South America. We're happy to work with people on improving that area. Angelique says, do you explore trends depending on the geographical location? Not explicitly, only if you enter the name of the geographical location into the topic terms. So if I was interested in pesticides in Thailand, for example, I would put in pesticides in Thailand and trust the algorithms to hopefully locate content there or about there. Okay, so oh, here we go. Algorithms in there. Yes, biases, of course. There are potential biases in the sources that we've selected in the algorithms. I agree. I would say that the biggest challenge behind the tool at the moment is that it's operating in an ever-evolving field. So, for example, the tool is manipulating the RSS feeds of news and science publication organizations. These are not stable. They change the format of their outputs at whim, and if our algorithms are not aware of that change, then we stop reading content from that source. So I would say that yes, bias could exist, and we have published on how we develop the algorithms in the past that can be shared. But I would say the much bigger challenge is how the much bigger source of what you might consider bias from an end user's point of view is on the accessibility and the up-to-date access that we have to science content sources that we cannot control ourselves. We need to monitor. We have software that monitors whether we're not taking any content from sources, and then we have to go and find out why it's not, and that's a human activity undertaken by our developers. So I think that's a bigger issue actually, rather than the algorithms per se, because we're not doing machine learning and more deep learning, which is possibly where the biases have a bigger effect. Okay, I'm going to take liberty now just to share my screen one last time and go back to the presentation. Okay, sorry, just getting there. So this is really just my last slide, just to give us an opportunity. So the tool is now, we're in the process of evaluating with trials with some science publication outlets, one in Germany, also some German magazines. We're also working with the BBC. We got some very positive feedback from the science desk at the BBC last week. We're working with freelancers. We're working with content management system companies to embed the tool in their products. We are happy to give people access to the tool if they want it for a limited period without paying. It's not perfect. It still has little glitches. It's sort of like driving a very full lorry down a very bumpy road, and occasionally bits keep falling off the back due to the speed at which we're moving, but I think we're getting there. And so if anybody does want to get access to the tool, can I ask them to email me? Our new version of the user management functionality will be available on Monday, so I can't actually get you to sign up directly now, but if you email me, I will then arrange for that access to be provided over the next couple of days, and we can discuss what you might be interested in exploring with the tool, so we can also support you in that. So that is my last slide, and some Twitter handles if you want to follow up on what we're doing. Any last questions? Because I make it 12 o'clock spot on.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. That was really interesting to watch. Alessandra, did you have any final words?
No, just to wish to thank Neil and just mention that this tool that Neil presented is one of the tools that the project is developing for journalists. Just to mention the others, which I think are also very interesting, although they address other beneficiaries. Another one is a curriculum on science journalism, which is also developed by the City University London, which is a master level curriculum that can certainly be adopted probably or inspired other university. and then a series of toolkits. One is for journalists, and the other are for scientists, museum explainers, and social media. So if you're curious, just go to our websites and you can find all our outputs, and just enroll to our newsletters, because we are ready to come out with these toolkits and the curriculum. Thank you very much again to all of you.